kind of an overview of what we do. One thing we don't do, and I'm sorry, I always get this, people ask, and I heard it in the orientation, are we going to, run GPU program? Well, you're going to do that, but it probably won't be till late in the second semester, or really into the third semester. Unfortunately, we start from scratch and work our way up. So a lot of you will be a little frustrated to start when, the first assignment seems pretty easy, and I get these, like we talk about SVN, and I get people ask, oh, I know SVN, and there's books out there on it, and I'm like, well, there's certain things I want you to learn about SVN, and then trust me, it'll get harder. If you don't believe me, ask the two TAs about writing sweep tests. It was a nightmare, and it just gets worse. So we will get into that stuff. We'll get into the fun stuff, and it'll get harder fast. We try to get. I don't want any of you guys getting roadblocked to start, and we always run into problems with SVN and people getting their computer set up and not having network access. So we kind of start off, and it helps me gauge. Each class as a collective has an experience set, and I try to I don't want to leave the guys that are, maybe not great at C++ behind, but I don't want to bore the guys that are, that have got experience at it. So I try to hit the middle, and I try to, we got two TAs and myself to make sure that you guys that maybe don't have this C++ experience get where you need to be, but we also want to, we talk about stuff that hopefully is interesting to the guys that have done it a lot. And one thing I do want to say, like I said, this is not an intro to C++ class or even an intermediate. So if you don't know C++, or you don't feel you know it well enough, you need to start working on that right away. I think it'll become apparent because in the first few classes I will start talking about things, and if just they go over, I'll start using terminology in the language, and I'll drill down into something, and the basic terminology I'm using is losing you, then you'll probably need to do that. The book I suggest, I really like this book, Thinking in C++, if you don't feel you know the language. The cool thing about this book is, although I hate them, it's free in PDF format. And not free as sometimes we think of free, it's legally free as far as I understand. So I think you do better with the book. It's more of a walkthrough, it's not just a reference book, it kind of teaches you a few things. So that's a good one to, maybe you should breeze through it. When we started this program last year, this is the book we used for what was previously semester 1, which is now semester 2, Game Engineering 1. And I thought, well, we're not doing this stuff yet, so I won't introduce this book until second semester, but there's just some stuff we need to talk about that this is a good read. So this will be your book for second semester and on. We don't actually follow the book. I think it's a great reference. If you could just read it through, a lot of what we do moving forward will make sense. So, yeah, so that's that. And I think I kind of mentioned, does anybody know what I do all day? Come on, you know what I do all day. What do, Miguel?
Magic.
No. I write a lot of code. That's what I do all day. That's what I'm paid to do. So guess what we're going to do in this class? We're going to write a lot of code. That's what we do. That's how the class works. I do one. Last year for the final of this class, I did a written test. It wasn't that hard, I don't think. But for the most part, you guys are going to write code. And the guidance I've been given from Mark is, and the program is about 6 hours-ish a week worth of homework, which is code writing, is what we do. So that's what you should expect. And like I said, if the language proves a difficulty for you, then that 6 hours can quickly multiply, if you get roadblocked on something. And I suggest if you do that, you don't bang your head. I think Mark talked about this the other day. Talk to your, you've got a lab here. I don't even know where the lab, they move it every year, they're at a new one. So you've got other people in the lab, you've got your 2 TAs, you've even got other guys in, are you guys in cohorts 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, are they in the same room or do you?
No.
Okay, well anyway. So yeah, don't let yourself get stumbled if you're working on the homework and you're blocked on something you don't feel is part of the assignment, trying to find help, And again, the mailing list is there. I love to help out, you know, especially during the winter when there's not much else to do. You know, it's kind of fun for me and it helps me. As far as grading, so last year was the first class, the first year of this class. This is the second. I plan on changing it from next year, or from last year. I don't know how many assignments we'll get, but basically your assignments are, the bulk of your grade will be your assignments plus the final, whether that be a coding final or just a written final. One thing we tried to do last year is we understood how, you know, you're taking a lot of classes within the program and outside of the program, and it doesn't always kind of collate. You know, you don't always have the time you need for this class. You know, if you're busy in this class, hopefully you're not in the other class. But sometimes the stars align and you're like, man, I got something to do in projects, I got something to do in C++ for this, I'm taking a math class, so I got something to do. So we tried to be a little lenient in getting your homework done, you know, when it was due, and that failed miserably. Second semester, by the end of the semester, 90% of the class hadn't finished their second assignment, and so we're not doing that this year. The assignments will be due on time. The one caveat is they don't, and don't burn me on this, but they don't have to be perfect. They need to be an effort, and these guys' job and my job will be to make sure you made the effort, that you just didn't go, oh, I'm late, just do it in 5 minutes, I'll check in an empty project. If we feel like you didn't put in the effort, but if you need to make try to hit the letter of the assignment, and so, and then if these guys will look at it, and if they're like, well, you kind of missed this, or you didn't get that right, then you'll have the opportunity to fix that, and then it'll be just like you did it.
Will assignments build off each other?
Yes.
So if you don't finish one, it's going to hurt you.
Yes. In fact, through pretty much the first year, you build upon what we do from class to class. So that's a good question. In the past, we've kind of done things and then thrown them away, but I don't like to throw away code. So every assignment, especially when we go into next semester, every assignment will build on top of the one before it. You'll be starting sometime this semester, and then through the end of next semester, you will be building your own engine, and we'll build a little game on top of it. And so, if you don't have all the pieces, which are the assignments, then you generally can't move on. So yeah, that's basically the case. A couple of other things. I always hate when I do all the grading, and I go, okay, well, 90 to 100 is an A in the class, and then I look at it and go, this guy 89.5, that really sucks. So what I do is I look back, and these guys will help me. I look back at participation, in class participation, and just as a part of the group in general participation. And I go, well, this guy asked a lot of good questions. He had some good comments. He seemed to be awake during class. And so if you're on the border there, I'll say, okay, well, you were right below the line, but you really tried hard in the class, so you get a bump up. The other thing is SVN. I've tried for 3 years to, SVN is source control is an important part of what my day-to-day job. Is using source control. That's how we work, and we're going to talk about this here quickly. And I've always taught SVN or source control, and at the U they use SVN. Again, we'll get into that later. And I always try to get people to do it right, and they just don't. So this year, part of the grade is part of your grade will be on your SVN usage. And the great thing there is you can trick me, you might be able to trick these guys, but you can't trick source control. I can go back and look at logs and for every one of you, and it'll show me exactly what you did. And if you don't do anything for a week, your SVN access for a week is nothing, and then suddenly you drop something into your assignments folder. I'm going, well, didn't do it right. And it also annoyed me because I always get these people coming up to me after class. Yeah, I didn't get the assignment. I deleted a bunch of files on my computer accidentally and lost them. I'm like, well, just pull down your last version before that from SVN. That's what it's there for. Well, I kind of didn't put it in there. So anyway, but I understand that it's getting easier now that you guys have a lab here. Everybody's got a computer, and you're always connected to the you know, to the university's computer. So we'll be going back, and I'll be going back and looking at the SVN, and these guys will too, to make sure you're using it right. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's how you you post your assignments. Is you and I'll show you the, hopefully show you the structure if I can get my computer working. But you basically drop it into there's folders inside. All of you have, how many of you actually looked at your SVN or know you have one? Okay, a few of you. But there's a, everybody has a tags folder, and you basically will, when you get an assignment done, you drop it into the tags folder. And the great thing there too is, and this may be getting a little beyond you guys that haven't worked with SVN, is if you drop a copy of an assignment into your tags folder, go back to your trunk and continue working, and then these guys come to you and say, oh, this part, you know, on this assignment 1, you didn't quite do this right. You've got that over there. It's not, you know, you're not going to go, oh man, I've made a bunch of changes, because you've got that assignment in your SVN as it was, you know, when you submitted it. So that works really well. So that's basically how we'll do homework and stuff. As I said, we write a lot of code in here. We also write all of our code. For the time being, because we're learning, everything you do, you will write yourself. You know, no pulling code off the net, and even STL. We'll talk about STL and the upside and downside of STL in the future. And I think we still got an ongoing argument about STL or something. But until we talk about it, none of the assignments should require STL. Yeah, it might make your life easier, but there's some things you need to learn. So from now on, just assume when I give you an assignment, that everything in that assignment you have to write yourself. So, all right. So that's kind of my spiel on the class. Any questions up to this point?
How to access SVN?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm glad. So there's and these guys have it and I have it. There's a URL and part of what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a walkthrough of SVN for you guys that don't know it, and for you guys that already do, how I want you to use it. So there's a URL that points to your SVN repository, and then most people use, I don't know if there's anything else anymore, there's a program called Tortoise SVN that you'll install, and it might already be on the computers anyway, right? On your lab computer. So that's what you'll use to access it. So, and your login is just your UNID and your password. So, just so you know, our first assignment will basically be to check something into SVN, and the goal there is to make sure everything's working right. And believe me, everything I've talked to everybody, the IT people, and double and triple checked that everything's set up correctly, and about 20% of the file something goes wrong. So,
hey Joe,
yeah.
is the SVN link the same?
Yeah, but just listed, it's cohort.
2013?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll bring it up here, because I have it somewhere.
Sure.
But it's just cohort 4, whatever. What are you guys, cohort 4?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah.
We don't have access.
There's one for every class.
Do you?
We don't have access
Okay.
yet.
Anyway, yeah, we'll go through that. So, so that's basically the way you work is through Tortoise and URL. Any other questions up to this point? All right, let me see if I can get this thing flying half right, and we'll oh, by the way, so yes, we do use SVN, which is what we use for all of our. That's our code repository, and that's where we check in our assignment. The other thing we use is Visual Studio. I use 2012. I don't know if 2013 is out there. I would prefer to use 2012 because that's what I have access to. And you should be able to get. How many of you guys? It's in DreamSpark. I guess you guys all have access to it. Is that true? You guys don't know. You guys know? That's where you guys get it, right? DreamSpark.
The
Visual Studio.
Visual Studio?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's in a-
Again, I apologize because I'm not part of the program and I don't work up here, so sometimes things are a little clueless to me. So
I can
these
send
guys will help you find
It's
it.
free for
Um,
students.
Check that.
No.
I believe you guys all have computers in the lab, right? That you're own, so I don't. It might be on there. If not, you can install it. Obviously, if you have laptops, you can install it there. So anyway, yeah. So those are the two primary tools we work with Visual Studio and SVN, and it just,
If you're off campus, you need a VPN to access.
no, it's just it's through SSL, so you can, I access it from home all the time, just through my desktop at home, so yeah, it should work.
So the Visual Studio version is 2012, and I suggest that everyone use the same one,
Yeah.
because otherwise it creates problems.
Yeah, like I said, I think 2013 is out, maybe, or beta, but use 2012, I like 2010 better, but the class seems to like 2012, so, go with that. Let's try to, and that way, if you need help from another student, like these guys, or me, it's, I have, I only use the Express edition just because I didn't want to install the whole thing on my laptop, so, alright, let me try to get this going again. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is I just want to, how many of you have used Visual Studio? Most of you, okay. How many of you have used SVN? How many of you have used source control at all? Okay, so we got a few people that haven't used it. So I'll walk you through it. Does anybody not know what source control is? Okay, so SVN is a piece of software. It's short for Subversion, and it's a what a lot of people call the source control system or source control provider. And basically, it's generally a back end on a server somewhere and a front end client, typical client server architecture. And it's got two main jobs. As far as, it does a lot of things, but it's got two main jobs. One is it allows a large group of people to collaborate on a product or on a code base. It allows us all to, if we were all a big team and we were working on a product, it allows us to work together. And its primary job there is that if I go into a file in the code base, and so do one of you, it makes sure that if I make a change and you make a change, that they don't step on top of each other. That it knows how to make multiple changes to the same file. And the way it does that is there's a concept in there's a lot of different source control systems. There's SVN, which is what the university uses, so what you'll be using. There's Git, which is what we use at our studio. There's Perforce, which we also use at our studio. We use two source control systems together. It's kind of crazy. And there's some old ones like Visual Source Safe, which isn't really used, and I think there's some new ones too. But we use SVN, and so the basic premise is the code base for a project or multiple projects, as much as you want, live on the server, the source control server, and it stores it however it sees fit. And then when you want to use that, work on that code base, you tell it you use either through most of them, there's command line or through something like Tortoise SVN's front end. You say here's the URL for this project I want to work on. I would like a copy of that. I would like to check that out, and it drops that onto your machine wherever you tell it. The important thing it does is it tracks exactly what state that project was in when you got it, and it knows based on that state exactly what state all the files were in. So if I say, okay, I would like to work on our game, and I check it out, and then Nikhil does the same thing. Let's say I check it out first, and I go to work, and Nikhil checks it out later, and he makes a change to a file, and then I make a change to that same file, and he makes a change, and he's like, okay, he does what we call a submit. And different source control systems use different terminology, so these may not all be SVN, but some systems call it a commit, some call it a submit, some call it I think those are two. So he pulls it down and it tracks it like, okay, this is the state he had it at, and then he makes a change to a file and he checks it back in. I had also checked that out, maybe even before him, and I make some changes to the same file. And then I check it in and it goes, okay, well Joe, when you checked it out, here's the state of that file, and here's what it is now that you're done with it, and it finds all of the changes. It says, okay, these are the changes you made. Then it goes, looks at the file after he changed it and goes, okay, well, luckily for you two guys, all of his changes were up here and all of Joe's were down here, so the file is now at the state he changed it to. And I'll go through this. And then, even though the version of the file I'm working on is different than the current state, it knows the exact changes I made and it goes, okay, I can make these changes to the current state of it because they don't conflict with anything he did. And then we all go on, we're happy. And so 98% of the time, we're, no worse. And when you got, like I said, when you got a database like we have, they get pretty huge, chances are that, that we make changes in the same area are pretty low. But that happens, and that's, most systems call that a conflict. And when that happens, the source control software goes, you know what, you guys both made changes at the top of the file, I'm not sure exactly what's going on, and it'll throw up a red flag and say, okay, you need to, I can try to do it, or you can tell me exactly how you want your changes made to the new state of the file. And sometimes it's easy, you go, oh, okay, that's pretty easy. They were close to each other, they weren't in the exact same place. Other times, there's a small chance that we both change the same logic, and then I gotta run over to him and go, what's going on here, or make my best guess. But once I do that, then I say, okay, now it's good, I think the two changes are good, and then I commit it. That's what we call it. When we make a change, we push that change up to the source control system. It's called a commit. So that's basically the way it works. So its main job is to allow a bunch of people to collaborate on a project and track the changes they make by keeping track of what state the files were in when I checked it out, and then when I check it in, what changes I made. The other nice thing it does for us is it does versioning. And basically what that does is, let's say, Nikhil and I check out the code, start making changes, Nikhil checks it out, makes a change, checks it in, and tests very well. I check my change in, after him, so I changed the same file he did, now it's been 2 changes, and then I run the game, I'm like, oh, man, you broke it. So what it allows us to do is, one thing it could do, if I broke it, I get to say, fine, back out my change, revert my change. If maybe 3 changes came along, like mine came along and someone else's before we realized his change broke something, most source control systems will allow you to revert just 1 change. So even though the file's changed 4 times since we all started working on it, if the first one's bad, we can say, oh, revert this. And source control can do that because it basically keeps track of deltas. It says, okay, here's where the file started, and then here's Nikhil's change. And so it doesn't really necessarily keep a master copy of each file. It just keeps what it started with and a copy of each delta. And then when we decide his change is bad, it's like, fine, I'll go back and invert or revert that delta and pull it out. So that's the other thing that it does for us. The third thing, like I said, is if you guys, you check it into your source control system, you're working on something, you're checking in, and your hard drive fails or something, it's always got an up-to-date copy, and you can say, all right, I broke something. I've done that before. I've checked the game out, and I start working on something and run it, and it's like, man, this is horribly broke. And I start backing up my stuff, and I'm like, man, I swear I undone everything I did, but you can go back and say, give me a clean copy of it. Or you can, you might want to say, one thing we do a lot is we work, we get a version of the game done, maybe we're not done with the game, but we get to a certain point and say, okay, this is our test version, and then we go on working. Well, anybody that wants to play just the test version, we know the test version of the game is good. And since the version control keeps track of every change up to where we're at, we can go back and say, well, I want this version because I know it's good and I can play it. So it allows you to get a version of the copy of the code base at any state since it started. And we'll look at this, and the way it does this is when you look at SVN and you look at a log, it's got a revision number, and for each change it tracks that. And we'll talk more about it. I don't want to dump a bunch of SVN on you guys that don't know it because it gets overwhelming. So as we go on in the next few classes, we'll talk about it, and then we'll eventually we'll get bored of it. So, but you'll see. Like I said, I'm going to do a little demo here just real quick. So those are the cool things SVN does for us. Any questions so far on that? Okay, well, let me try to get my little demo set up here. Sorry, I'll get you. I'll get you. A little bit of light. Oh, one thing I want to tell you guys before I start this, like I talked to you guys about earlier, when we first started teaching this class, we didn't really have a curriculum set up. We had an idea of what we wanted to teach, but we didn't have everything written up. So we would come up here and I would give lectures, and then the first class was really small, it's like 9 people, and we were always getting asked questions, and people would ask me, you know, how do I do this thing? So I would, I just whip up the code and write on, you know, right in front of people, and I always hated it because, you know, I get nervous in front of classes and I'm prone to error. Well, turns out people liked that. They liked the whole, you know, Joe writes code in front of them. So a lot of the demos I do up here are on the fly. I mean, I try them at home and play around with them, but a lot of times I just, you know, do things kind of on the fly. So sometimes you have to bear with me, but I think it you know, proves that I'm fallible, you know. And once you guys get not scared to open your mouth and talk, you know, people start asking me questions. You know, I'm not a guru at I mean, I'm pretty good at the language, but I can be stumped. This is really small. Sorry, it used to work to where it would duplicate and then something changed.
You're showing us your bank account, Joe?
Yeah. Let's see. Seriously. I'm trying to figure out why this ain't working for me. And I don't know why it thinks that's, we're really in trouble if it's going to. There it goes.
Joe, do you need your laptop?
Do I need it? Well, to do this, I kind of do.
I mean, you can connect mine if you don't need yours specifically.
Well, yeah. Oh, that's not.
Perfect.
Not the- I guess I could do it. Well, I don't know if it, I have some code here that I want to. I know this works at 1024. I just don't know why I won't go to 1024. That's weird, see, I don't. This has to be, it's the same one we used last year, I believe.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Last year we used
Show mine, but I can't get to mine. I
Show
can't show you,
mine.
but basically, and I think these guys have a copy of it, and you can pull down mine, but it's basically a little thing where it prints out, here's your, here's where you are, and it just prints things on the screen. Here's your location, and here's 4 monsters in their location, and it says, okay, get a key move, and you move, and it updates where everybody's at. And I always get all these questions, oh, well, what are the rules? And I'm like, there are no rules, it's do whatever you want. And the focus of that first project is not for you to write that game, but it's kind of to give us a test bed to work in. Because we're going to kind of take that, and you're just going to write it, and then we're going to start talking about, here's how we do it, and you'll start changing things out. But it gives you something to work with to get your feet wet in Visual Studio, and get your feet wet with SVN. So that'll be, your first assignment is just going to be to check something in SVN, and that'll be due next week. And then your second assignment is to actually have this little monster chase gun. And the important thing, like I said, is not the rules. The important thing is that someone else, like the TAs or another student, can pull it down and build it, and that you properly checked it into SVN, you don't have the wrong file there. But anyway, so let's say we're doing it here, and one thing that's a little tricky here is with Visual Studio, and I would love to talk more about Visual Studio, but it's really hard to work on these monitors because Visual Studio, if you've ever used it, it just uses tons of screen real estate. I mean, you need to be at like 1600 by 1200 or higher just to even work day to day. It's frustrating. So some of this stuff will probably, we don't. There's a lot of things I would like to show you guys in here, and we'll talk about some of them. And it's extremely frustrating when we do because like I said, the screen real estate gets used up. So. But Visual Studio works on a concept, it's basically a development environment. And it works on the concept of, you have a solution which is kind of a conglomeration of all of these things that you want to have loaded actively in these projects. And we're going to talk this week or next week about build steps and build targets and what they are, if you don't know them. But basically, each of these will become a build target. And it's a little confusing because it wants to know, okay, what's the name of the solution and what's your name, and that's kind of generic, but what it really is it wants to know the name of a Visual Studio project, which is an individual build target. And you can have multiple build targets in here. You can have build targets that are dependent on other build targets, and if that's all confusing, it'll get a lot more, I apologize, but it'll get a lot more, you'll understand it a lot more in the future. And I have this real problem where I sit down and I start mapping out class lectures, and I'm like, oh, before I talk about this, I need to talk about this. And before I talk about this, I need to talk about this. Before that, I need to talk about, suddenly I'm in a circle. And I'm like, well, where do I start? So sometimes I just start somewhere and you'll get really confused, but hopefully in a few weeks, the lights will go on. And the other problem I have is, I have to come up with weekly lectures, but I also need to drive homework. So it gets, anyway. So I'm gonna go on, and so I'm gonna call this name of my project Game Code, and you'll see why. And then,
Just put it in documents.
what's that?
And just put it in documents.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, you can see here, I don't know if you can see these little things here, but this is a red exclamation mark, and this is a green check mark. And when you install Tortoise SVN, it actually will, it's got a shell extension that tells you this green check mark says, okay, everything in this directory is source controlled and it's up to date. These little red ones say something has changed with that project. And this is really good because as you're working day to day and you get ready to go home at night, you can, whatever, you can go, oh, well, it's not up to, it's not up to date. And since you guys, when you work, if we were all working as a huge team in a repository for a game we were working on, I would highly suggest you don't check anything in that's going to break anything, because, if you check something in and it breaks a game, then there's, 29 other engineers here that can't work. However, because you guys are all working in your individual SVNs, I think it's a good idea, just to check in you know, every so often, just to, you know, to keep up to your SVN, you know, as a safety, it's kind of your backup. And as well, I'll talk more about SVN here in just a second. But anyway, so I'm just gonna create something. You said in documents?
You can put it anywhere, I don't care. I was like, you have to roam around, man. I'm gonna steal all the awesome code, John.
Okay. One thing, if you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this little checkbox here, but this says create directory for solution. It's actually kind of it does that, but it's the opposite. If you check this, it creates an additional folder for this project under the solution directory. If you don't, it puts everything in one. And I prefer to do it this way. And in fact, we're going to talk in the next few days a lot about code organization. That's a big thing to me because in the first semester, you know, people would check in their we weren't thinking about everything that we needed to teach in the class. We were focused on, you know, some stuff like collision and you know, and memory and stuff like that, and people would check in their code, and people that hadn't done a lot of programming, there would be one directory with 40 files in it, and you couldn't, I'm like, what is, you know, and one file would have, you know, a few thousand lines of code. And so we'll talk a lot in the next few days about organization, and, you know, briefly. It's, you know, and it's something that each of you can kind of do that works best for your brain, but you've got to be organized because things grow quickly, even in this class. You know, I get a lot of students that you know, walk into class tired and they give me dirty looks, and I'm like, what's the problem? And they're like, I had to reorganize my entire code base, you know, and I'm like, well, that's, you know. So anyway, so that's one thing. The other thing is there's this add to source control. Now I have Visual Studio 2012 Express, and this doesn't work, but there are actually two plugins, and I tried to test them, but they don't. The Visual Studio 2012 Express doesn't support plugins, but there are actually two plugins, one called Ankh SVN and the other one called Visual SVN that integrate SVN into Visual Studio, so you can do everything directly within Visual Studio. They're probably a good idea. They've got really high marks on the little Visual Studio, you know, plugin repository. And again, I didn't have time to test them. I tried to, but they don't work. You know. So anyway, so we're going to create this, and then it's going to come up and ask me some questions. And there's just a couple things here. For now, we're creating an application. And then the other thing is this wizard is useless. I don't know anybody that's actually used the wizard to generate, because it automatically generates some files for you that I don't see how anybody would want to use. So we come down here and we say, I want an empty project. You know, don't bother me. Let it finish. And really? That got slower than mine. Anyway, so we have this. We have now our solution, my game, and we have a project called Game Code, for those of you not familiar with it. And one of the reasons I call it Game Code, we're going to talk a lot in the next few days about, or probably today or next week, about what we call the game engine split. I mean, you guys have all worked. Some of you guys have worked with something like Unity, right? Or you guys worked with a game engine, right? Who hasn't worked with a game engine here? Okay. Well, you all will, and so we tend to think, you know, this is what we do in our industry is we write, you know, we couldn't afford to make games if every time we started a new game we just said, okay, create an empty SVN repository, let's go at it. We tend to develop technology to recreate, you know, so we can make as many games with that technology as we can. And the whole idea is, you know, we generally work in a specific genre, you know, like play Call of Duty or something, or, you know, third-person shooter. So they've developed an engine that allows them to write third-party shooters, or third-person shooters, or first-person shooters. So that code base there is the engine that they use to do that. But then they want to write, like, the game with that, so they write code for the game, okay? And so whenever we're writing code, we're like, well, where does this, is this code part of my engine? Or is this code part of my, my game, you know, is it specific to my game, or is it so, you guys, as we move forward in the next few weeks, we'll create another project that's our engine, and, you know, we'll try to keep our game code and our engine code separate, and we'll go over that, I think, next week, but I just, like I said, it would be overwhelming to do it here. Anyway, what I want to do is do this. I want to come in here and create a new source file, and I know this is boring for most of you. This is one thing I mean on, whenever I create, you know, there's an entry point for your code, and I would put mine in lowercase main.cpp. Keyboard, sorry. Your space bar is me.
No, it's not.
Alright, so there's my my game. Not very fun, but it's code, it'll compile. The first thing I want to do is I want to go out here and look.
Test out.
So here it is, here's my test app, and here's my game, and in here is my main.cpp. The first thing I want to point out is it's created a lot of files for us already, okay? And some of these we need, some of these are specific to what we're doing, and others aren't, and I'll show you one thing. So here's our main.cpp file, and then here's this. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a VCX project file. That's a file that the Visual Studio needs to track. That's what all information about this little project I created. And there's this filters file, which is actually information that it keeps about how you've organized your files over here. So if I was actually to go to move this main.cpp into header files for some reason, that filters file would change. The project itself would not, but the filters file would, because that filters file tells it how to organize this tree over here. And the cool thing about that is if you don't check that file in, which you don't need to build the game, then everybody that works on a project can have their own filters file and can organize the files however they want. So it's optional whether we check that in or not. We do have to check in the project file and of course the CPP file because those are part of our game. And then if we go back here, there's a bunch of files, and then you can't see it, but this is a solution file, and that tells Visual Studio everything that falls under this tree right here, this this solution tree. And then these other files, these are actually databases it's created in order to help you code complete. And you don't need to check those in because it generates those on the fly. And in fact, once I close this project, I believe the open SDF goes away. It keeps an active one. And these files get really big really fast. If you've noticed, I've created one file, main.cpp, with like 4 lines of code in it. And this SDF file is already up to 334K, so they can easily grow into the megabyte. So we don't check that in, okay? But we do want the solution, and this SUO file is the user options for the solution. Now you shouldn't need that, but I had people last semester say, hey, I couldn't, you know, when I said, okay, you find a buddy, have them pull down your first assignment, build it, people told me that it didn't work without that file, so you can check that in or not. So I'm like, okay, I've got what I needed, and I'm ready to check in. Do you have
Yeah.
Okay, so the way I do it, and you may be able to, well, I want to get, so if you install Tortoise SVN, it installs a shell extension, and you should have a directory right here, or a list for it. And you'll notice here, I want you to notice it says checkout. So this is what we would use. If there's already an existing project and we wanted to check it out, we could click checkout and it would ask us what. So let's say we want to import. Well, the first thing I want to do before we do that is I want to look at the settings. And I know it's kind of hard to read, but right down here there's this thing called a global ignore path. And this is a list. You can see that star.o, star.lo, la, blah, 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 blah. There's all these things in here, and this is basically a list of files that we tell it to ignore when we check in. So for example, he doesn't seem to have much in here, so I could go back over here and I could say, oh, well, I don't want a .filter file, so I can go add that to the list. Okay, save that. All right. So let's say we go back here and we're like, okay, I'm starting up my SVN. So I say, okay, I want to, and the first time we decide we have some code we want SVN to control for us, we do what we call an import. You can actually do a create repository here, which will create a blank. If you've got a blank directory, but we say we want to import, and here's where it comes up. You can't see it. There's a URL of the repository, and this is where you would put that URL that you'll get for these guys for cohort 4. But we'll do it there, and we'll just say, okay, this is my initial import. And you notice down here, there's actually a thing for some reason if you want to include more files, you can. But we do, okay. And it goes off. And I know it's hard to read, but you can see it there.
I think it's the 2013 one. So if you change to 2012.
Oh, okay, I see what
So
you're saying.
if you go to SVN and change to 2012. Yeah.
Actually, let's do this.
That one was definitely good.
Oh, I can't do mine.
No, you can't because it's loading with
Is
mine.
that your UNID there at the
Yeah,
top?
that's fine.
Okay, and we're gonna look, but you don't want to do it right to here, so I'm gonna do. I should have done this other thing first. Let's go over here before we do this. Sorry, I started before the horse. Anytime you want to, one of the things, we've got this right-click menu. You can right-click on the desktop, blank desktop, and there's this sort of says menu, you can do the Rico browser, and this will let you go. And this is where you would actually plug in the URL for your SVN directory. And if we do that,
2012.
yeah. So this is his directory, and they've actually changed this a little bit. But you've noticed there's a directory called branches, one called Dropbox, one called private, one called tags, and one called trunks. A trunk. And basically, unlike other source control systems, SVN treats everything kind of universally as a directory file. So these are just directories. You know, they have names specific to what they should be used for, but they're just branches is for branches. We'll talk about branches in the near future, probably in the next few weeks. The important thing is trunk is kind of the root. That's your basic. This is where I work. Is the trunk. This is the base of my SVN repo. Tags is like I talked about earlier, where I said, oh, okay, we've got a version of the game done that's testable, but we're going to go on and work. So we want to mark this as playable. So we could drop a copy into our tags directory, and I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. But that's where, and this is where you're going to put your assignment. So you're going to work in your trunk. And when you get ready, when you're done with your assignment, you'll put a copy of it in your tag, and I'll show you how to do that. It's really simple. But we're going to be organized so that these guys it's easier for these guys. When you finish an assignment,
gonna run on the board really quick. You would put it in this directory tag, and you'd probably you'd create a directory called assignment 1.
Under there, and that's where you do it, and I'll show you, and I'll actually walk you through this. But we're gonna stay really organized so that it's easy for these guys, they can, if they want a script or whatever to pull down all the assignment ones, they can just write a script that iterates through all these directories and looks and tags assignment 1 and pulls it down. Private is just what it says, it should be private. Might even be private to you, because the author is admin, hopefully this should be private to you. Yeah, because we didn't have this. Yeah. And then the Dropbox, I believe, is like if someone wants to, you want to either give something to somebody or somebody to give something to you. And then branches is for branching. We'll talk about that later. Really quickly, what branching is. Let's say that we're all working on a game, and we've got one repository, and our game's in the trunk, and we're all working on it, and we're like, okay, you know what? We need to write a new graphics engine. And so I tell these guys over here, you're all working on a new graphics engine, and you guys are all going to continue working on the game. Well, you guys can't collaborate and make changes if, you guys might need to break things, to get the new graphics engine in, but you need to all work together, so you don't want to break what these guys do. So we would literally take where we're going to start the graphics upgrade, and we would create a branch that's called the graphics upgrade branch. And then you guys could all collaborate together in that branch and not break any of us that are working in the trunk. And as I talked about before, since SVN or source control keeps track of the state of the game at every change, if you guys go off in the trunk or off into a branch and work on the graphics upgrade, we're all continuing to work here, we're all moving on. And you guys get done, you can just merge. You say, okay, fine, I want to merge the graphics update branch back into the trunk, and SVN or SVN will try to go through and look at what changes you guys made as a collective group and see if it can integrate, try to integrate those back into the main line. Okay? And actually, the little side detail, the better way to do it is not to say, okay, let's move all the graphics changes back into the trunk, but you guys all hold on for a minute. We'll integrate all your changes into here, make sure it works, and then push that back into the trunk as the updated version. So anyway, this is how this basically works. And inside your trunk, you don't want that just to be the root, but see, he didn't do it right. You got all these assignment directories inside your trunk. You should have one, active working directory, but.
This was just a branch.
Yeah. Anyway.
We were working like this though. The script that I
we're not
wrote.
going to do that this time. So anyway, let's go back to what we were doing. And so up here, I have, and I know you guys can't read this, but you can work through it. Like I said, your goal for next week is to check something in. You're going to have a lot of questions. You can ask the TAs. You can bring those questions to class next week because it's really hard to read what I'm doing up here. But anyway, so I said, okay, here's the URL of my for me. Then you can't read it, but I'm working inside the trunk in a directory called mag, and I want to submit this, import this. Now it should work. There we go. Okay, cool. So let's go back and look at our repo. And there's my game.
That's mine.
What was it? What did I call it?
My app.
Oh, my app. So there it is, okay? So one thing I want you to notice is if we go into the game, that it didn't check in that filters project, that filters file, because I put it in my ignore list. However, I forgot to add the SDF files. Whoops, my bad. Okay. There's two things I can do. I can delete them from here, or there's one other thing I'll show you. Now, one of the things that kind of screws people up is what I've done now is I've imported a project or a code base into SVN and said, I need you to track this. That's all I've done. I'm no longer, it doesn't know that I wanna work on that, it just knows, okay, you've imported it, it's mine now. So, what you need to do, once you've done that is, come back out here. I'm gonna do this back directory because I screwed up the name. And you can say, now I wanna check out.
Zero seven six four four six.
Okay, so now I'm saying, okay, I wanna check this out, so I wanna now work on it, just like if I already had a code base that we had for our game, that, I wanna check it out and start working on it, and there's a few things here, the head revision means I want the current update, you can actually, again, as I told you before, you might wanna work on an older version, you know, you have a stable version, you can say, oh, I want, you know, some other revision, but we do this, and there it goes, and it did that for us. If we go look, I think I moved it into a slightly different directory. Yeah, it is. Now, the one thing you'll notice is, now it's got this little, check mark, so that tells us a couple things. It tells us, one, that this source control is, it's tracking my, working with this. The other thing you'll notice, if I right click now, the SVN checkout is gone, but I now have these two other options, SVN update and SVN commit. And basically, update says, you know what, I've been dinking around here for a while, I may be out of date, give me the latest version of whatever's in there. Of course, that probably isn't something you'll use a lot because you work in your own repository. And commit, now, so if I was to go in here now, now I want to close this because this is the old version. And you can actually, I should have done it, but you can actually check it out right over the directory that you pushed it from. So if you create it on your machine, import it into Visual or into SVN, you can actually tell it to put it right back in the same directory, and it'll go, whoa, there's files here. Just say that's okay, and it's actually smart enough to realize that you're kind of clobbering the same files and it's all happy. So let's open that back up. Put that.
Should be in G drive, so
I go off the root. One thing you notice here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this hidden folder called .svn. That's the information that drops on your system to keep track of where you know, it doesn't, some systems keep track of things on the back end, SVN keeps track of this, you know, your state on the front end, on your end, and it does that so that it can put up those little icons that keep track of, you know, the changes. If it kept all that information on the back end, it would have to constantly communicate with the back end and know if you changed something. So anyway, we'll load this up. Where'd everything go? The heck? It's all there.
oh, here's what happened, Joe.
I
I
know.
didn't save the solution before checking it in.
So I made the rookie mistake.
It's open in Visual Studio.
And I'm glad I made this mistake because you will all make it. Whenever you're checking in solutions for the project, save or exit Visual Studio. Probably gonna be broke. Again, I do things on the fly, I make mistakes. One thing you will notice is when it brought up, you might have noticed, is when it brought up that when I brought in the bad one from SVN, it, under game code, there wasn't all of these. It was blank, it just said external dependencies and it didn't have any of these. That's because I didn't check in that filters file. That filters file is where it keeps that structure of it. So anyway, so now I've added that, so now I'm going to quit here, save it. I'm gonna go over here to SVN. Going to delete it from here. I select that, well, let me show you something else that's cool, this confused me. So, I'll delete it from here. And it did that, but, okay, got rid of it. Sometimes you need to refresh, there's a refresh button here in Tortoise. The refresh, sometimes you'll delete something and it doesn't go away, you're like, why not? And then you refresh, oh it did, it just didn't update. Alright, so we'll do this all over again. Practice makes perfect. And it did it again. Now I should be able to go back out here. Check out. The thing I hate about this is it doesn't remember URLs. Well, it does sometimes. I don't know what it is, how it decides when to. Put that.
That's not.
Put that, thanks. Okay, now it's because I used the same name again, it's saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not empty, you sure you want to do it? I'm like, yes, I do. And you can see that it just updated basically, it said, okay, it's version all over, it didn't copy, I did point that out before, but it wasn't smart enough to know. And it gives me the revision number I'm on. And again, just so you know, each source control system uses numbering to, well, most of them do. Git uses MD5 hashes every time you check in, which is really confusing because they're not numerical, you know, they don't go in order. SVN uses just incremental numbers, but the problem is it does it from the root of the the repository, which is the entire classes. So if one of you makes a change in to your code, it might say, oh, okay, this is a revision 4477. If someone else makes a change to their code, that's 4488 because it's treating everybody, like I said, it just basically treats everything under the repository root as directories and files. So you're all just directories off the root, and so when you guys go make changes, it'll, you know, anytime anybody makes a change, it increments it. Okay, so now we get the green, same as tracked. And there's our SVN file. So I can go in here, and I go in here. Now it's all right. Save it. If we go back out here, now notice that things have changed. Notice game code has changed. Main's changed, so you can, you know, it's nice because it gives you a visual representation of the changes you made. Now, one thing you'll notice is, notice it changed to these SDF files. Let me close this. Notice it changed to that SDF file. And what did I say about those? We don't need them, right? Oops, I checked them in. I forgot to add them to ignore them. You can do that, but as Nikhil actually pointed out to me, there's a cool thing in here that you can right-click on them, go towards SVN, and you can say, unversion and add to the ignore list. So if you accidentally leave a file there and it gets checked in, you can either delete it from within SVN or you can say, okay, unversion and add to the ignore list. And it's got several, it should bring up a list. Oh, there it is. You can either say just that specific file or star. And then Okay, and there you go. Now, the other thing is, that once we've done that, we're back out here, and we go, oh, well, I've changed a bunch of things, what have I changed? So we can say, okay, if we click on commit,
It gives us a list of exactly the change we've made, okay? So, we modified main.cpp, and we deleted the SDF file, and we modified the SUO file, which we said we probably don't need, but we put it there. So the thing is, so like, okay, so we've made changes, and it's telling you you've got changes from the root, from the base where you started. So, once we've made the changes, now we need to say, okay, I'm ready to commit these changes. Once we make a change, it's just not automatic, we have to commit them. So, one of my pet peeves is, when people, again, like I said, I don't think people use SCM correctly. I would prefer all changes be atomic. And what I mean by that is each time you commit, you're committing for a specific purpose. I added this feature, I fixed this bug, I fixed this compile error. I don't like to see commits that are like, here's 27 things I did. And the problem is like I was talking about before, what happens if, Nikhil checks in 25 changes as a code base in one commit, and one of those breaks something? Well, then we gotta weed through and we gotta manually back that change out. If all of those changes, each of those are atomic, then we can make them one at a time. Then we can just go to the change that was disruptive and get rid of that. So what you can do in here is you can say, okay, fine. Let's say I want to push the one that deleted that file. So I unclick everything but that, and then I say, okay, I'm removing unused or unneeded SDF files. And then we can, and it does that. So it says, okay, that's changed 4478. Oh, well, we're still red, so we go back here, and we say commit, and it's like, okay, well, we want it, okay, now we made a change to main, so I'll just select that, and then I can say, okay. Does that one. So we still got the red there because we have the SQL file, so, but, we can do that again. So that's the basics. And now if we look in, come over here, refresh. And you can see our repo is nice and organized, and we in here, is the file we want. It is slow. That tortoise is slow, no matter where you're here. I don't know why. This is slow. Yeah, maybe so. Good point. One thing, let's try here. Is one thing we can do. Oh, sure. Now you come back. Oh, now it's unable to connect. Oh, that's great.
Connection.
Yeah, alright. Oh, I know one thing I can do. So here's the reason why I did it in that order, okay? So I created my project, I added a file, and I checked it in. And the reason I did that is, let's go back in here and see if it works. One thing you can do now is you go here and you can say tortoise SVN. Show log, there it is. And if it's working, and it's not, it should, we'll see if it works. Let's go back over here to Visual Studio. So let's say we load back up this solution, and we build it. Now you can face. So we build it, and it builds correctly. You can see down here it succeeded. The reason I did that is we go back out and look in this directory. Oh my! Look at this. Now we've got this debug directory.
we've got this debug directory that's got our executable and a bunch of files, we don't really know what they are. And then if we go into our game code directory, now we've got a debug directory there. Look at all this stuff, okay? All of this got created once I compiled that 4-line piece of code. That's one project, or a solution with one project, one file, 4 lines of code, and suddenly I've got all of this, okay? And that's why we checked, that's the problem we was having before, is when all people would do would go and work forever, and then they would dump this whole directory into source control. None of these files you want people, these aren't files that we need for day-to-day work. They're, they're generated by the compiler and that. So, so that's why we check in before, and you could try adding all of this stuff to the ignore list, but it gets tedious and you end up using wildcards that are over-aggressive. And if I could get this to come back up.
Connection code. The internet connection.
Reconnect. Right, you guessed. So what I want to show you is a couple things. Got sidetracked. One thing is we can go in here and we can do show log. And it gives me a log of all of the changes I've made. And this is what I'm going to be looking at. Because the cool thing is, it shows you the log from the directory you've taken down. So you notice if I go start at the root, it shows where I removed the unneeded SDF file from the solution directory and where I did my initial import. If I go back a directory, why did I do that? It should have only shown me. It's weird. Probably got it phoned up because of that. It should only show me from the directory down. I don't know why it's. Well, it does show me. Okay, because I guess that file was part of all. Anyway, so if you go down directories, it'll only show you the log for. It should only show you the log for files for changes under that directory. Now the other cool thing is, I've got all of these files in here, right? That I don't want in source control. If I go back up here and I do commit, you notice that it shows them all, but they're not selected, okay? And all you have to do is go up here and click on version. Should. Why is it not working?
You just click
Oh,
on
okay,
one
there it is,
version
okay.
and go check. You should go none and then version. None.
None.
And then version.
Okay, there you go. Alright, the other thing you can do is go down here and just turn off this thing that says show in version file. And it doesn't show you any of the files that aren't version. The problem there is if you add a new file, you don't see it. So generally I leave this on so that I don't. And that's one of the biggest changes, the biggest way we break the code base working in our industry is I make changes, I add a new file and I compile and everything runs and I commit and someone's like, dude, you broke the build. I'm like, no, I don't, it works for me, and it's because you didn't check in a new file. So you kind of have to leave that on. So anyway, so that's what I want to see you guys start out with. That's your first assignment basically for next week is check in something that works, and it can basically be the same thing I did, hello world. It just needs to be something that you show that you make sure, and it's not about getting I want you to get all that stuff right, but it's mainly about making sure that your workflow works for you, because like I said, it seems to get munged up more than it should. Let's take a quick break, and let's take maybe 15 minutes to a little before 8. There's a few more things I want to show you with SVN, and then we'll call it a day. So one of the things, so a couple people asked me, I wasn't completely clear on this. what files do you need and not need to check in? The more general answer is, anything, what? Okay. The basic answer is what, and what files do I need to check in is anything needed for someone else to build that project. Obviously that includes source files, CPP files, header files, and you'll learn this, but the solution file, the SLN file, and any VCX project files, or what they call it, project files. So that's the general answer. And the best way to do this is commit or import your project, what you think needs to be there. Look in the repo browser. Check it out to a different directory. You can go to any directory on, I put it here in my app, but if I create another directory called test, then I can go in here and I can do FCN checkout. So I can check out and then I could go in here, and find it and check it out. So I could put it in another directory. So I could check it out to another directory and build it and test it and see if it works. And if it pulled down and something wasn't right or a missing file, then you've got you haven't put everything there. And ask your friends or neighbors or Nikhil or your TAs. And now the hardest thing is finding out if you've got files there that shouldn't be there. And one way you could do that would be, to check it out and build it and see if any. Don't change anything, but check it out and build it. And if any files change from building it, then there probably shouldn't be there. But unless the solution project file. But the best answer would be to ask, one of us. So that's there. So the other thing I want to talk about is, let's go down and look at his. So if I look at that file main.cpp, it shows me all the changes to it. Initial import, and then I changed the startup message, and you can see down here that's there. And I can actually, I'm working on the fly here because I haven't done this. I didn't think about doing this. Compare with the previous revision. And it'll show me exactly what I changed. You can see here and highlight. It's hard to see, but that showed me what I changed. Now the reason I show you this is, one, is it's cool to go back and look at what changes were made. But the other thing is version control is tracking every change I make to that file. Now one thing you're going to do when we move forward is you're going to refactor. It'll happen. Nikhil, how many times did you refactor your code base?
The game itself?
You just, yeah.
Yeah. Can't even count at this point.
Your code will grow fast. One of the rules I like to live by, and we'll talk about some of these later, is whenever I create a new class of any substantial size, I create a CPP file with that same name for the class code. I create a header file with that same name. So if I'm creating a vector3 class, I'll have a vector3.cpp, a vector3.h, and maybe a vector3.inl, which we'll talk about later. But I create a lot, and I do that because I know, looking at a file, a source file, then what's in there, But anyway, you'll refactor a lot. And the thing is, you'll be really driven to, you're like, oh, I had this directory full of miscellaneous stuff. And I decided, oh, it's two things now. Maybe I've got some math code in there and I want to create a math directory. Well, the problem is, if you just, on your hard drive, you go and create a folder, you go into here. And you create a, you're in your game code, and you're like, oh, well, I want to create a new folder called main for some reason. And I want to move everything that's part of the main app in there. And you're going to be really tempted to take this file and drag it into there, but don't do that. The reason why is because then source control doesn't know that the main under the main subdirectory is is the one that you've been editing here. You lose all of this version control. It'll let you do that. If I actually do this, if I do this like that, and then I go back up here, and I do commit, it'll see that there's a main missing, and there's a main non-version, and it'll actually let me check that in, and it'll delete the one and create another one in that main subdirectory. The problem is, it doesn't know the two are the same. So what you need to do is, I'm going to go move that back. I don't know if he has all the extensions here. There's a way to actually do it through here, and he doesn't have it set up. But the thing you can do is you can go over here into source control. And you can actually, right from here, you can say, add a folder. That's not what I want to do. Where is it? You don't have it here.
Create.
Oh, there it is.
Create.
And the reason, sometimes I stumble on SVN because, like I said, we don't use it at work. I use Git and Perforce. And then I can just do this. Pray this works. Should show. Oh, I know why. I have to go back here. So now what it should have shown, it should show the change log. Oh, I guess it does. So if I click on the main and main dot, if I click on that one and this one down here, it still shows me the revision log. So I know that I keep track of the changes I made to that file. So and I know you guys will probably won't do this because it's hard and you'll forget about it. But man, in what we do, we're always refactoring, and the worst thing to do is to lose history for file changes, because you'll go in and look at some code in a file and you'll be like, why is this logic here? And you'll go look at the revision log for that file, and if it's not right, if it's gone because someone refactored without using the source control system, then you don't know. So anyway, so it's always better to do it that way to not lose your change. Oh, the last thing I want to show you, and that I kind of just did, is let's say that this my app is what I'm done with. I'm done with this is my first assignment. What you do is then you're going to go up here to your tags folder, and he's already got them, but let's create a new one. We'll use lowercase. I can go up here, select everything, and let's see if I can put that. Did I make that full? Oh, there it is. Okay. Drop that into there. And that's the basics of checking in your assignment and everything done there. So that's what you'll do. So as you can see here, he's got, under his tags directory, he's got, assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, on and on.
Do you still have all the files in that?
Actually, you know what, I may have, or not, I may have, it's a good question, I think I might have moved. Yeah, I'm, okay,
Actually, what you need to do is right click and use copy to.
I know, yes, like I said, I don't use this stuff, so you can, go back. Really scary when you do stuff like this with, actually, let me just try something.
You just copy paste it.
I'm gonna try, yeah, let me. I should be able to back this out. Might not be able to do it from here, might have to do, from the command line. Anyway, with most systems, you can say, I wanna back this, I wanna undo this, and there should be an option here. But, again, I know that's the end viewer, I'll figure that one out for you guys. Go back in here. See, there should be a copy, shouldn't there?
No, you need to go back up one fold,
Oh, one.
as in in the trunk, and just right click and say copy to,
Oh, okay, I don't know, okay, yeah.
and then get provided with the path.
Again, I know as an viewer, I can figure it out when I need to, but. Yeah, now that's actually a copy, okay.
Yeah, if it already exists, then it doesn't copy it, so you need to just give it a new name.
Or not give up. Now we can, anyway, that's the basic thing, so you wanna go, and it's kind of weird how they, at some levels, you can do certain things, okay, so now we can do copy two. Now we can do assignment one. I like it, there seems like, it's like I have a love-hate relationship with, SDN, Fortis SDN, because it's really kind of user-friendly for new people, but the whole, having to use URLs all the time is kind of a pain. Oh, did I? Okay. There it is. Anyway, you get the point. You do the copy, and if you need help, you can ask these guys. So are there any questions so far on SVN? We'll actually talk about it a little bit more, but any questions?
I kind of about file structure and stuff, but you mentioned wanting to have folders for projects, so say so it's not just a bunch of files.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned filters. Is there like a preference? Would you rather?
Okay, yeah, you want to do it at the, not use the filter, at the directory level. In fact, you have access to my, here's mine from last year. And if we look at my, I don't know if you can see this, but, you guys shouldn't be looking at this, good. So you'll notice, I don't know if you guys can, let me check this out to this hard drive so I can make the font a little bigger. This was a project I did for him last year. This is a good thing, because we had a few minutes left, and, if you'll notice, one thing you'll notice, if you can read any of this, is, okay, it's pulling down all the files from my stuff. There's CPP, HI, and Ls, nothing else. No, there's some projects in there. But, so let's go look at that. This is something we're going to talk about next week, we're going to talk about this week. So here's my engine. One of the things we did, and I always thought it was fun, is we named our engine, and everybody, it was fun to see the names everybody came up with. And we're going to talk, again, we might talk about this today, but and we can, in fact, we can talk about it right now. When you're writing code, and we'll talk about how to set this up in Visual Studio, probably the start of next week, but we're gonna set up our solution so it has one project for our engine and one project for our game itself. And we make our game dependent on our engine, and our engine's a library and not an executable like our game. We'll get into that next week, so I don't want, but anyway, but we create these two projects, one for our game, one for our engine, and then as you write code, you want to determine where that goes. But to answer your question, is there a way to increase the font here?
Yeah.
Reducing the resolution will.
How do you scroll on here?
No multi-touch.
Here somewhere. Alright, let's just. Magnifier not gonna work. You guys are just gonna have to trust me here.
Can everybody kind of read that?
And Nikhil, come change it, make your font bigger here so we can see this. You guys log out and log back in, I think that. Well, you're gonna we'll make you look.
I've looked stupid enough today. Yeah, do you know how to control scroll on your mouse pad? Okay, that's good enough. Let's leave that. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, that's good enough. So, to answer your question, so this is the engine I wrote in my ref sample from last year, and this is how I work. And this is a good thing to get into. Everybody has a different, everybody's brain works kind of differently, and to different people, organization comes different ways, and the way I like to organize may be different than Nikhil or any of you guys. The important thing is you are organized. And so this is what works best for my brain. So here's my root of my, this is the root of my solution for my reference sample. And I have a directory, here's my solution in my SUO file, and you'll notice that no other files came down when I pulled my stuff out of there. Here's my game folder, and here's my engine, I call it Azure. I don't know where I came up with that.
You said that it was the shortest 4-letter.
Yeah, it was. Because what I did last year, and I don't think well, I don't know, but we didn't talk about namespaces until several weeks in, and people had written a lot of code, so we had to go back and change everything. But anyway, so within my engine subdirectory, I have I have my source folder, and I started with an underscore because they always sort to the top in Windows. So that's just something I do. If I'm going to have a bunch of directories and I want one to come to the top, I put an underscore at the start. Anyway, so I've got my project and my filters file. I think we checked those in last year anyway. Anyway, if you look at my source folder, really quickly, this is all the source of my engine, and you can see I kind of broke things up for for my actor class. We'll talk about my configuration stuff. We wrote a config file stuff. Console, which we do a lot of in game development. We love to spew information to the debug output because we need it. It's very useful. And then we have a containers folder where I wrote some basic container classes, some helper stuff. Sometimes I just hunt on where things go, and this is kind of where things end up until I decide where things grow. And then we have my loop, which is the flow loop for my. And don't write all this for your first assignment. Seriously, because we will change it all. And for your first assignment, just get something like I did the Hello World. But anyway, so that's basically the way it works. And then if you look in one of these folders. This is, I have some basic math utilities. I didn't quite know where they went yet, and so I put them in utilities, and then I have my Vector 3 class. And this is a good thing to talk about now, and I just talked about it, is I'm a big fan of, if I create a class, and we'll open this up, So I open my vector3 header file, and what's in there but a vector3 class, okay? So I know it, you know, and you kinda gotta discern where things are at. Well, it's part of math, so it's probably under math, so. But anyway, so that's the way I organize things, and this is, you know, kinda how I write code. I actually write my best code for you guys, because I wanna, you know, at work you get lazy and I don't comment, but, so that's basically my organizational structure there. And, there's the header file, and then, you know, of course, it's the CPP file. And, you know, and we'll talk about later why, you know, my CPP file for my vector class has one thing in it. So, anybody know why it has one thing in it?
Make sure a lot of volumes and stuff in your header file.
Because,
Do you have an INL file?
yeah, we inline everything because we want the performance, and we'll talk about why. And then, so if you look at my, I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but everything is actually is inline, so put it in inline file. There's less comments here, so I get lazy. So that's basically, does that answer your question? So that's how I organize my stuff. Now if you looked at my horrible demo earlier about moving a file, you know, from where it's sat to a directory, and how hard it was, you probably want to start out syncing in a way like this. Now, if you're not an experienced programmer like some of you guys are, if you're just starting out, don't frustrate yourself, because it gets really, you know, it gets really confusing to do things within Visual Studio. But if you're familiar with it, knock yourself out. You know, you'll learn in time if you're not there. One thing I like to do, and I notice he has Notepad on here, is I hate, it's a lot of work in Visual Studio to create new files, so I tend to do them in a little more slimline editor like Notepad, and then, you know, create the basic stuff, and then in fact I can show you here. If I go over here really quick, back to our test directory. I tend to do things like I tend to like to work in Notepad, and I just create a new file here. And let's save it. It's not exactly like mine. So I tend to work like that, and then back in Visual Studio, I just tend to like to go over here and say add existing file. I just think like that, but there it is. So is there any other questions on our this first week, and what we talked? I know I've kind of thrown a lot of stuff out there. Any questions at all?
How to roll back a particular comment?
You should be able to. Have you done that from it toward?
Let me see.
I swear you.
I make no mistakes, so I'm gonna go.
And Git is it's stupid easy.
Just go to the top level, just test app. And right click and see the log. And show log. Oh, there's a reverse right there. It's
Where's it at?
oh, okay. So here's the 2 or 3 things that you can do. That's the latest checking that you can get back.
So that's yeah, that does the latest. But I thought
Yeah, and the other one is
I swear.
right click and check the log.
The log in yours is working wonky.
Okay, right click on that. See, it says revert to this revision. And
Oh, so revert changes from this revision should do it. I don't know why it wasn't showing up earlier with
Because you were in the, you were looking at the log from the repo browser,
oh, does it not do it there?
so it doesn't do it there. If you go to the top level directory, test app, and you say show log,
It's right here. should show me just for that file, right?
Yeah, so it's like you added it and that's the revision history, so it's still at 4483.
Yeah, but I made one change to it, didn't I?
Yeah, and that's the change that it's showing you at the top, the oops thing.
No, there's one other, cause I changed the text.
of posters.
I swear there's something wonky here, cause you should be able to come up here.
I think this is, you did two things, you changed the text and you moved it, so the move also is shown.
Oh, maybe I did wipe it out. There's any of these others that have. But that's always worked for me before. Go into the log. Oh, is it because I did this? It is. So in theory, here's where I moved it. I should be able to revert changes from this revision. I should be able to revert that. See what it does. Oh, I know why. Okay, so the problem I did is I made changes within the repo browser. And my local copy is not up to date, so I need to come in here and do an update. And now, yeah, now my game code, now it shows me a file that shouldn't be there, and then in here it says me. I should be able to go in here and do. See, it's still not doing it. It should show me the revisions to that file all the way up.
But there's only one revision for that file, right?
But if I move it, it should have both of them.
The movement is not counted as a revision on the file, it would be on the folder structure.
But I should be able to revert this one. See? It's wonky. I'll put together a demo of how to do it right. I kind of been throwing around in here. But it does work, so you should I mean, I've done a lot of stuff here. And I broke something horribly. But it definitely should work. I don't know what I've done here to break it. When they killed it.
Basically, all you need to do is go into the log, find the revision, find the version that you need to go to, and say revert changes from this revision. And theoretically, it should work.
Yeah, it should work.
You can also compare and switch over just.
Yeah, you could do a diff and make the change. I'll put together a demo for that, because that is actually something I want to talk about. All right, is there any other questions so far on what we're, one thing is I'm horribly bad about, I generally try to send out an email to the mailing list with your assignment specifications, and I'm really bad about it. And last year they just said, oh, Joe didn't send anything out, so there's no assignment. That's not true. You're gonna, because I have another job I have to do too, so I tend to, when I get done with the class, I tend to go back to work and forget things. So try to follow the gist of what I say in class as the assignment, and then at least work on it. And if you have questions or someone ping me or them, say, hey, where's our assignment specification? So, yeah. There's some other stuff I wanted to talk about, but it's getting kind of late. Is there anything anybody would like, any questions anybody has just on what we've talked about so far?
If you're working on code and you do an SVN update, it doesn't change the file that you're working on.
It will not remove your changes, but it will try to integrate in any other changes to that file made by other people to your version.
Okay.
So, and you can get merge conflicts. So you can get merge conflicts if you try to submit a file to SVN and someone else has changed it and try to fix them. And also you can get merge conflicts if you try to update and someone else has changed it, your local copy. Now, I'm not a guru of SVN because we don't use it, but we use Git at work. And one of the nastiest things about Git is it requires you to update before you check anything in. So if I change a file if I'm editing a file and I want to change, make some changes, submit some changes, and Nikhil has changed that file, it requires me to update mine first. So apply his changes to mine before I can check in. And so Perforce doesn't do that. If he made changes and then I made changes, it'll just integrate my changes, try to merge in my changes into the current version of the file. But with Git, it basically it requires my version, before I check anything in, it requires my version to become the head, what we call the head revision, which is the current revision of the code base before I check in. So it would make me pull all changes, integrate them into mine, which is a pain in the butt, but it's nice because it requires me to update and apply all the changes to mine, but that then allows me to build and make sure with all of the changes plus mine, everything still at least builds. Good question over here?
I was just wondering if, isn't that like commit does it to your local repository and then you push those changes, or is that?
That's the way Git works. Git commits locally and then pushes to the server. SVN does not. SVN just lets you make changes willy-nilly, and then when you commit, it pushes them to the server. So Git adds that extra step, which is nice, because the nice thing about Git is you can work locally for as long as you want and commit atomically, and and make these minor commits locally on your machine, and then when you're like, oh, now I'm back at work or back, I have a connection to my repository, then I can push them all. But with SVN, if you want to commit one little change, you have to have access to the repository. So
while we were checking in files, there's tag folder and trunk folder on the server. So we just keep checking into the trunk, and then the final version should be in the tag.
yeah, so then you'll want to do the thing, again, the demo I really messed up, where you right-click on it and say copy the tag folder. That make sense?
You earlier mentioned there were some plugins for using SVN.
Yeah.
So like, if we set up that, then you don't have to deal with such kind of so many.
I have no idea. Yeah, I believe that's the way they work. Is you still have to do things, but it just, instead of going into the browser and right-clicking, or going into the Windows and right-clicking and then saying commit, there's just a menu within Visual Studio that allows you to do it. And again, I tried to use them, but they don't work with Express, which is what I have, so I didn't even know about it until I was poking around the other day, so we didn't use them last year. But yeah, I'd try them out. Right behind you.
I'm just wondering, why are we using Subversion over Git? Is it any...
Because that's what the university sets up for us. That's what they maintain. I like Git, but...
If you use a free repository like GitHub, then...
Yeah, there might be some university might not like. I don't know, we just, that's what we use, that's what the university supports, so we've always gone with it. And I think, I agree, I like Git, but man, for someone that's not familiar with source control at all, Git is confusing. I've been doing this, like I said, for 20 years and been using source control since Visual SourceSafe, and sometimes Git just, it gets mad at me. It's like, oh, you're in the middle of a rebase, and you're like, what did I, and I pull my hair out. Whereas Perforce seems perfectly natural to me. So, Shane and I, who teaches the second year, actually talked a year or so ago about going to Git and using a public, a public repository. We just, Git is not where you want to get your feet wet with source control. I like it. We use it at work, and it's very powerful. But yeah, so we just kind of stuck with SVN. And if you wanted to use Git yourself, you're fine. The only thing you need to do is make sure you submit it to SVN. Actually, that wouldn't work because we need to track your logs and make sure you're doing everything right. So just stick to SVN.
I have a question. So when you move stuff over into the tags and you come back and tell us that we need to make some changes to that, do we merge our changes into the tag folder that we created initially, or do we create a new tag?
No, you would just want to update what's in the tags folder. So what I would do, so you're working locally. Locally, you're on your PC. You're tracking what's in your trunks folder, right? Does that make sense? So everybody should understand what I just said right there. So in your trunks, you've got my game or whatever, and that's what you're tracking locally. Then you say, okay, I'm done with this assignment. You go into the repo browser and you move it into your tags folder. So now there's a copy of it in your tags folder that if you make changes locally, don't get changed. But then Nikhil goes and pulls, Nikhil or Cheryl goes and pulls that down and says, oh, you need to change something. Your best bet is to go into the repo browser, into that tags folder. So your best bet would be go into the tags folder, and let's just say this is your assignment, and then you would check, and then I would do check out, and check that, if you check out that assignment copy into another directory on your machine, make the changes you want to make to fix the assignment, and then all you gotta do is commit, because it gets committed right back to the tags folder. That make sense?
It might give you a warning saying that you're committing to tags. Are you sure you want to do this?
In mind, yeah.
So just say yes if you know what you're doing.
What if you've made all your changes in the trunk? Can you just merge that into?
You should be able to, yes. Yeah, merging is something I would love to talk about, because I like merging. We do it a lot at work, but I just don't want to overwhelm you guys in the first day. So maybe next week we'll talk about how to merge. So maybe I can put together a sample so it gets a little smoother here. But you can merge, yeah. I think some people did it last year, didn't they?
They had to.
Yeah.
No.
I think they actually fixed, what they would do is they would finish an assignment, move it to their tags folder, and then they would go back and they would actually fix things in their trunk, and then the things they fixed in their trunk were needed to complete the assignment, so they would just merge those in. I'll put together some samples that go a little smoother than the first. Half my classes are a disaster, but the first one's always the worst because nothing ever goes the way I want it, and I always get questions that I always prepare as much as I can, and I get questions that are things I didn't think we'd want to talk about, or things we're going to talk about next week. We tend to do that a lot. One of my things I try to do is I can see already, some people are asking me very intelligent questions based on, they've used their experience with source control and using this, and other people are looking at me like deer in the headlights because they've never done this. So I tend to like to, approach subjects in several waves. The first wave is pretty simple, and a lot of you guys might be, snoozing in your seat, and other people are just, oh, I'm overwhelmed, but then we'll move into the more complex stuff, and hopefully by the time we do, the people that were sleeping in the first class are going, oh, okay, this interests me, and the people that were, were blown away in the first class are like, oh, okay, now I get it. So, so we'll maybe talk about some more advanced SVN stuff next week. Really, I love, like I said, I'd love to talk about merging, but last year I did, talk about it, nobody cared, because they're like, yeah, whatever, I just want to drop my stuff in there.
I can vouch for that, by the way.
What's that?
I was the TA last time around as well. I was supposed to take this class, and the first few days I was like, eh. And then later on I was like, oh my god, Joe's teaching really cool stuff.
Yeah. And I tend to, it gets back to me from Mark, these guys said it's too easy. I'm like, okay, we can turn it up. The bottom line is the reason for this class is because when we didn't have this class, everybody was thinking. Everybody, we would come up here and teach things in Game Engineering 1 that were just blowing people away, and and we're like, well, this is where we start. This is our easiest stuff. So, yeah, if you're a little tired, if you're a little bored this week, enjoy it. But it'll get crazy fast. And again, if you care, just ask them about writing the sweep test, and they'll swear my name.
Love your sweep test.
No.
Hey, yeah, how long did it take you?
1 month.
Huh?
What?
2 weeks?
1 month. It took
No, because I did it more detail and I got small bug and I just like, I want to fix it.
Yeah, I could introduce the sweep test here and right now and nobody.
No, you want to do the helix things, right? No, the spline things.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got
Another thing that brings up is one thing is, and you'll probably notice this already, most of everything I teach comes from my head. There were several times the first year and second year students actually sat in class. We were in the library, and I did the collision. We write what's called an OOBB sweep test, which is a collision check to check if two objects have collided during a frame. Not if they're collided now, but where the two objects were and where they ended. Did they collide during that path? And they were actually watching ESPN on the MacBooks in the library in our classroom. And then they went home and they're like, I'll just look it up on the internet, and it is not. Did you guys try to look up the sweep test on the internet?
I didn't have to.
Okay, well anyway, there's a lot of stuff we talk about that ain't out there, it's all, it's what we do in class, and, so you'll, try to pay attention, and we will have videos, right, I believe?
Oh,
I that's-
think she's recording.
Okay, we don't have the big camera in the back.
Yeah, we don't.
No, we don't.
Microphone.
Yeah.
So I used to wear a microphone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But anyway, so you'll probably wanna pay attention in class, because, and missing classes can really hurt, so. Any other questions? All right, well, it's 20 to 9, so we'll call it a day for today. Shirley, you'll send out an email to the mailing list?
I did.
Okay, you did. So anybody that did not get that email, you probably want to, oh, let me do this really quick before we go. You got hers, but just if you need it, if something, this is my email address in case you need it.
Just do one, just write in the hours and south on and we take it.
If you need it, if you have problems with the class or you don't have an SCN repository. Again, if you look, this is last year's. The URL for this year is exactly like this, but it's, let me do this really fast before you guys go. So this should be, let me. You guys read that?
No.
Can you send that out to the?
I did.
Okay, she did, but that's the URL for the SCN repository. And there are, if you go to Tortoise SVN, I believe there's all kind of documentation that should help you out getting started. The documentation on there is pretty good. So if today's class confused you. And again, if you need my help, I will respond to any questions emailed to me through the mailing list. And I lie and say that because I'm not on campus, I can only have access to your trunk. So if it's in your trunk and you need me to look at it, I'm more than happy. If it's somewhere else, I don't. So this is the way I kind of beat it. So. All right, that's good for today.
So if you want to have CAD account, you can sign it up here now. The CAD account for your computers and for the Visual Studio 2012.